back to another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast. I'm your host, Jawad Mir. Today's guest is James Clyne, who served as a production designer on Gareth Edwards' sci-fi film, The Creator, which came out in theaters back in September and is now available on digital VOD as well as DVD. I cannot wait to share this episode with you. We had a great conversation with a little bit of connection from the back in the early 2000s when movies like AI and Minority Report by Steven Spielberg came out. So without further ado, here's the episode and my conversation with production designer James Clyne of the Gareth Edwards film, The Creator. I would say you definitely probably don't remember this, but I spoke to you, I think when AI came out, way back.
Oh my God.
This was back in
way
the
before
day.
podcasts, so this must have been some other form of...
I think it was over the phone or email, because I used to run this fan site on DreamWorks and Spielberg, and I remember talking to you about AI very specifically. And
Oh wow.
and then when I remember when I was chatting with James Motorum, who you've spoken to about the book,
Yeah.
and then I read the book, and your name popped up, and how that just triggered, and I still remember that. It's good to see that you are doing something completely different with the film that we're about to talk about, The Creator, um, compared to what you have done throughout your career.
Yeah, I mean it's science fiction, and I've obviously done a lot of science fiction, but I think every project I work on, I think I try to do something a little different with it. Of course, I mean, yeah, I've got a short attention span, so it helps.
Yeah, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think you've done production designing at at a level that you've done on Creator. Please
No,
correct me if I'm...
you're right. This is the first one. I was involved in production designing a feature animation film years and years ago. It never happened, but this is really my first go at it. Yeah, it was a big one to go out the gate, and a little terrifying, but also just super exciting as well.
Yeah, I guess that the whole idea of doing something out of your comfort zone really pushes, people, including yourself. And while we're talking about that, even though I have read it in the book, I've gone through the whole book, by James, and
I see it there. Right? You've got it stacked right in the shot.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Nice.
I love reading these books. I'm in the film industry myself, so it's just something for me to always keep myself feeding information and knowledge and fun stories behind the scenes.
Nice. What do you do in the industry?
I'm a producer and director. I have
Oh,
directed
great.
several feature documentaries and got a couple more in the works. So this is just something
Oh
that was
man.
born. This was something born out in COVID. It started off as a DreamWorks podcast, and then I realized I need to expand it, and it's just fun doing it. I love chatting with people like yourself, and it's just really, really cool and therapeutic at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. I would love to know your journey with on The Creator, given that we were just talking about that you've not done production design, and Gareth's work that he has done from Monsters to Star Wars, Rogue One to Godzilla. How did that marriage start, that work relationship?
Yeah, I think in a weird way we have similar backgrounds. I'm a little older than Gareth, I'll admit that. But we kind of grew up on the same, all the same films. We grew up
Yeah.
in the 70s and 80s and 90s, just growing up on just some of the most amazing filmography in history. Like it's just such an
100%.
explosive time.
Yeah.
And for me being, a young kid seeing, I think I was a little too young for the first Star Wars, but I really remember seeing Empire Strikes Back in the theater and just being so amazed by the visuals and how much visuals were just stuffed in it. Like I remember coming out of the theater and I was like, I think there were like these big walking tanks in the snow, but I can't even remember because there was so much stuff after that,
Mm.
that it just made me want to go back and see the movie over and over again. I think this kind of genre, that's what you want. You want to go experience it and be in that world again and keep reliving those experiences. So I think because Gareth and I grew up at that same time, we obviously have this kind of shorthand of like what types of movies we like. There's always the obvious ones like any Ridley Scott or Cameron film or
Yeah.
Spielberg. Those are all the obvious kind of touchstones, but we also love kind of some of the more like B movie science fiction. Like I love Cronenberg and you know, smaller films like Enemy Mine and even some of the like cheesy bad films like Schwarzenegger, like Running Man, and so I think that kind of those kind of and those are the kind of conversations we had initially. I got set up with just a lunch with him down in Santa Monica at Barney's Beanery,
Oh, that's a
and we
great
were
place.
supposed to. It's a great place to hang out and
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
yeah, relax. So we were just there, and we were supposed to talk about the movie, and we spent hours just talking about like the films we love and what we get excited about creatively, and then it just kind of grew from there. My background, I worked mostly in LA. A big chunk uh, of my professional life was in LA, working in art departments, being on set, and trying to understand all the ins and outs of set design and film design and production design. And then 10 years ago, I've always been, of course, in love with all the work that ILM has done over the history. They have their own kind of, amazing history when it pertains to film.
Yeah.
And I was hired, and then Star Wars just started to kick off literally like a month after I was there. Um, and I got pulled into all of that and got to work with amazing artists and work with great people. And so one of those producers, Akiri Hart, she was a producer on Rogue One, and we worked together on Solo and some of the other Star Wars films, Force Awakens. And she kind of knew that I was wanting to work more on a different level. I'd spent a lot of time at Pinewood in the UK, so working not only VFX on the end, but working in the art department again, being around set construction and and all that. So she set up this meeting at Barney's Beanery, and Gareth didn't want to approach this movie the same way that other filmmakers might approach it. And one of the big things that he wanted to accomplish was leaving some of the design to the end of the film, meaning he wants to shoot his film light and go on location, go on real locations, shoot his actors um, interacting with real places, and then we would kind of top off our sets or our locations with more VFX on top of it. It was just a comfortable way he wanted to work. He convinced the studio that if he was able to work that way, he could do it for a certain budget.
Mm.
Um, and it was a little bit scary because it was kind of a bit backwards in how we typically make a movie. But to your earlier point, it was like really exciting to kind of go, oh, this is a big challenge. It's a big problem to solve. Let's figure out how to do it. Um, yeah, that basically in a nutshell is how we kind
Yeah.
of we met, and then just it started with more conversations of like, what is his movie, and what does he need out of it, and how do we accomplish that? We actually, and I hope it comes out on some Blu-ray or kind of behind the scenes um, release, where we actually made like a little 10-minute proof of concept short um, prior to the full production. So Gareth went out to Southeast Asia, shot all these beautiful locations: Nepal, Vietnam, Thailand, a little bit in Japan, and then he took all that material back to ILM and we kind of just did little paint overs of like, hey, we can do a bigger futuristic building here, we can add robots here. And then there was a little bit of a team that kind of took those ideas and comped them in, you know, built little models of the robots and vehicles and buildings, and we made this like beautiful reel that he then took to the studio and said, "This is how I want my movie to look," and they were all in once they saw that. Um, yeah, I'm hoping somebody can see it, a
I
public
would
can
love
see
to
it, because
see it. I would love to
yeah,
see that.
it's really beautiful. There's actually a couple shots from the the short that made it into the final film. So I don't know if you remember, there was like a robot on a moped, and it was kind of shot from a car.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's just a robot on a quick shot, and there's like a bunch of bananas on the moped. Well, that was basically just Gareth in a production car shooting out the window, just random traffic. It might have been Cambodia or Thailand, couldn't tell you. But it was just somebody on a moped, probably commuting to work, and then in the computer we just replaced the head with a robotic head. So
That's
that
pretty cool to know.
that's of that's one of several uh, shots that we actually put back into the final film.
That's remarkable. And that's one of the things I've loved about Gareth. I've been a huge fan of his when he came out with his, I think it was first film or for his first film that made a splash, Monsters, in
Yeah.
2009. And it was, I think, if my memory serves me right, after 2.5 years of that, I made my first I started working on my first feature documentary, and I think that was one of the many catalysts in my life where I realized that if a guy can go out around the world, use real location, real incidents, and turn them around into a alien invasion, it's not that difficult to make a film. And from a very innocent point of view, even though making films is very hard, no doubt about that. But his work is very few directors, and I'm going to name the directors that to me he stands among with in terms of embedding visual effects with the real images. Spielberg, Cameron, and Ridley Scott. Maybe there are a few
Wow.
other that I'm forgetting. I just think he has this way of embedding people into visual effects shots and real shots, and it doesn't look fake. And that was exactly the thing. When I remember I saw the Creator trailer, I didn't had no idea he was working on it. It was just a random movie when I went to see, and I was like, "Oh, this I'm looking for." Like as soon as I saw from the director of Rogue One, like I knew this is something that's going to be very, very special, and it was. It was a
Mm.
very good film. It had its still bit things here and there, which a lot of films do, but I really enjoy it, and I truly believe it's going to become like a cult classic down the road as time passes by.
I hope so. I mean, yeah, we're all very proud of the project. I mean, as you're talking, I'm just thinking about documentary filmmaking, and one movie that I don't know if it's classified as a documentary film, but one film we constantly talked about early days and throughout production was this film Baraka,
Mm,
directed by Ron Frick, I believe, maybe in the late 80s, early 90s. Just beautiful photography. It's non-narrative, just gorgeous 70 millimeter photography all over the world, all different kinds of cultures. Um, just just beautiful on every level. And it was a huge inspiration to us in that we thought, ooh, what if we can just do a Baraka that was 100 years in the future? And you just went and sat down and looked at this pastel of different cultures, but whoa, there's some flying vehicles. There's a robot just kind of shopping at a market. There's you know, I think I think why we like that idea is we want to feel like we can coexist in that place. And I think only the real world ultimately can kind of stand in for that. If you travel to, I just got back from Iceland, and Iceland was
mm,
just, you can't create a more strange otherworldly looking place. It's so beautiful in its beauty, its natural beauty. And I think we want to keep creating those feelings of being in natural beauty, but also the designer in us can't help, tweak it, create something new and different. And I think people like Ridley Scott and Jim Cameron, they create these worlds that your brain is just saying, this has to be real, what I'm
Yeah,
looking at. Um,
yeah.
and I think Gareth really strives for that as well.
And I think it's also a combination of that, what you just said, but also telling a really good story with really good characters, right? I mean, if those
Yeah,
were not there, then that there would be a, like a very big gap between the visuals and the story and the characters. And that's something that he's really good at. And I was talking to James Motorum, he was saying that how Gareth is just such a down to earth kind of like one of us kind of a guy. Like, he's not like a big celebrity. He doesn't come across like that in any way. And I think that's what it reflects in his films, the way he shot this film on Sony FX3, keeping the budget minimum and just in a docu style and being a camera operator himself. It shows. And again, I mean, he's probably the same age as I am. I'm a huge fan of his work and uh, uh, just always looking forward to his stuff. But going back to your career, James, the beginning of your career, you started off in the late 90s, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of your first proper film credit. Uh, is that correct to say?
yeah. I think it was this movie called Instinct with Anthony Hopkins,
Oh,
Cuba
yes.
Gooding Jr.
I remember that.
Oh, you remember Instinct, huh? Wow.
Yes.
Um, I was just, yeah, I got lucky to get on the film. It was a recommendation from another artist, and I was flown to Orlando, Florida, which is where we shot it, of all places. So I lived in Orlando for a couple months, and just drew. This was in the days, the late '90s, when everybody there was no Photoshop. There was nobody
Yep.
had laptops in the art department. We did real draftings, um, and had them, blueprinted and distributed out to other parts of the production. The illustrators, concept artists would work on a paper called vellum. We used marker and paints. So everything was done that way. There was no kind of control Z going back and undoing what you've done. Kind of what you do is kind of it. So
Yeah.
if you did something that just simply wasn't working, you would just start pretty much from zero and do it all over again. But it that kind of thinking made you really have to think about the work and think about, okay, where am I going to go with this? How tall are these ceilings? How
Yeah.
wide is this doorway? That kind of stuff. And yeah, it was a great experience. I worked on Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas for a little bit, designing like these circus kind of game fronts, because there's this
Right.
like circus type of Las Vegas casino. Um, so early in my career, it was just like bouncing around, just doing bits of everything.
Yeah.
And I think that as filmmakers, we're best when we're a little bit of a jack of all trades. If that, I mean, there's the
Yeah.
there's kind of the Wes Andersons of the world who have like a real point of view that want to stick with that point of view. But most of us are kind of jack of all trades. We have to, we'll be on a historical Civil War drama one year and the next be on some futuristic other planet kind of
Yeah.
sci-fi film. Um, so yeah, I started out just doing all types of films, and then I got lucky enough to work on with Mr. Spielberg on AI and Minority Report just prior to the 2000s. Rick Carter, who's a
Yep.
famous production designer, I consider him a bit of a um, he's a bit of a guru, to be honest.
For sure.
The way he approaches filmmaking and design and storytelling. He's really one of a kind. So he kind of got me my start, and he would kind of push me in front of the directors. I remember on AI, I was I was in my mid 20s. I didn't know anything about anything. I was just in love with filmmaking, in love with being, having that opportunity of working on the Warner Brothers lot while they were shooting, and I had done this image, and he's like, and Rick was like, "This is great. Go take it down to Steven in between shots and just have a conversation with him." Well, I had never like it always been like um, a scenario where you would do the art, it would go to the art director or the production designer, and then they would present it formally to the director or producer studio. And Rick, he just didn't work that way. He's just like, take this down, see what he thinks, get some notes from him, and keep going. So I waited off the sides while they were shooting, and he took a break, and I came in, and we had a little discussion about it. It was unbelievable. It was so
Sure.
surreal and incredible, and gracious of Rick giving me that kind of opportunity to kind of have those kind of conversations. So yeah, once
Yeah.
that started to kind of kick off, yeah, that's all I would really wanted to do.
That's awesome. And your career had like I remember, I mean, we talk about the 70s and 80s, which you grew up on, I grew up on, but also 90s was a big era, right? Like it was a revolutionizing way of internet coming in, marketing was changing, independent cinema was kicking in at a mainstream
Yep.
level. And the films that you had worked on, I mean, especially your earlier works that I was going through your IMDb, Bicentennial Man, Mystery Men, Titan AE, which bombed at the box office, but I remember people loving it, and it was a
Yeah.
great film. So, I mean, you've done some great, great stuff, and you still are. I guess what I would love to know, what was that moment in your life as a young James Clyne that triggered that thing that this is what I want, whether it's my journey is in the world of films or whether my journey is in the world of conceptual art, being illustrator in the film world.
Yeah, I have to give credit to George Lucas. Basically, I still have the book. They did a bunch of editions of making of books. I mean,
Oh
exactly like
yeah.
the stack you have there. I think they had like a making of for every of the first three movies, or I think it was called maybe the art of. But they did these also. They did these sketchbooks of like Joe Johnston um, and Ralph McQuarrie, and I think I still have it somewhere. And I would draw. I would try to replicate what they had drawn right next to the drawing in the book. So I have my really terrible drawing next to Joe Johnston's drawing, and I think what happened is that book was an entry into the world of filmmaking, in that I didn't know that you can do a drawing that would eventually evolve into a miniature, or it evolve into a set, or it evolve into a visual effect or something like that was such a bizarre idea, and maybe it was just I didn't even think of it. But knowing that there were artists out there that would draw with pen and ink and pencil and really kind of create these germ of ideas just on pencil and pen that would, yeah, would eventually kind of turn into these things that you almost believe. You believe that those AT-AT walkers live and kind of exist in those worlds. You believe that Han Solo and Princess Leia existed in those worlds, and I think being at the right age of like 8 years old and being exposed to all that just set it all off for me. But it took decades for me to understand that you can actually get an education. I studied industrial design, more automotive design initially, but I had some instructors that introduced me to more film design, and I think I was just drawn towards it for the reasons that we've been talking about too, of
Yeah.
like um, I get to work on a Civil War drama one year and then some sci-fi thing the next year. Like, I think my patience would wear thin if I had to
Yeah.
work on,
Yeah.
you
If
know,
you're doing the same
uh,
thing over and over again, it's gonna end up you're gonna end up repeating yourself too. That's another thing.
yeah, for sure.
But one thing I wish, and I learned this, I think, around the time when I spoke to you first, like that's when I understood there's a thing called concept design, like concept illustrator, like creating the visuals. And I, like to call people who are doing this kind of work is like director's eyes, because it's actually a director's vision is before it comes to the screen, he or she wants to see it on paper, right?
Mm,
And you guys are able to pull that off directly from his mind and his eyes and put it on paper. And it's just a fascinating thing to me. I mean, now we live in digital age, but when you're drawing with pencil, like, or colors or whatever it is that you're doing, with the use of technology, it is something that's completely from the scratch, right? Like it's just
mm,
there's nothing out there that exists like that. At least with a director making a film, like you base it on the concept and you take it on and you try to find locations and you build sets or you do, visual effects and everything. I just think it's one of the most underrated jobs from a mainstream point of view that many people don't know what you guys do. And it's incredible piece of work that takes so much time and so much visuals and hard work. So I just wanted to commend you on what you do. It's incredible what you guys do.
oh, thank you. Yeah, I think it's not an easy job. It kind of looks fun and exciting, and you just get to kind of like sit there and just dream up new ideas. But really, there's a script, there's a director who has their vision, there's a production designer who has their
Yeah,
vision, there's a budget, there's a schedule. All those things kind of play into you having to kind of think about, okay, well, I need to design this thing, but it needs to be a certain way. It needs to be built a certain way, or not that you have to think about that all the time, but there are certain kind of, I wouldn't say constraints. There's just kind of rules to the game that you
yeah,
have to
of
kind of
course.
navigate. Um, but but yeah, it's a unique art form in that you're not just in a studio by yourself painting on a canvas. You're working with hundreds of people
Yeah.
um, to kind of create this thing, and I think that's what's exciting too, is that we're all kind of in this collaborative effort
Yeah.
together, and
Yeah.
I just get so much pleasure out of working with like-minded creative people that we might not even all have the same idea or come from the same background or have the same angle, but it's like we're all doing this. It's one just big problem solving thing. We I'm terrible at math, but we are given an equation, and that equation is the script, and we have to come up with the solution to that equation. um, and that's fun from a visual creative standpoint. That's a lot of fun.
And I think one of the things that people share in the industry, whether you're, production designer, costume, whatever your job may be, spot boy, lighting, is that we are all, if not majority of us, I would say a good 99% of them are in it because we love films.
For
And that
sure.
I
Yeah.
and that idea of being around people, even if you haven't, like, the way you told me that you met Gareth, and instead of talking about the film, you start talking about films, the past films, because there's that
Right.
sense of family, that sense of camaraderie that this person understands versus the 20 other people that I really know what I want to do and what I'm all about. And I
Right.
think that people really enjoy doing that, and that comes across like in that problem solving task.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. It's a way to kind of be able to communicate immediately with somebody on that level. And that's
Yeah.
it's a really kind of beautiful gift to have, to be able to kind of sit down and talk about, you even mentioned storytelling. It's such a big part of all of it. And
Hmm.
as concept artists or production designers, we're still storytellers. We're still trying to tell the director's story, the writer's story through visuals. And that just, that's, I guess, inherent in all of us going back tens of thousands of years of just wanting to
Mm.
tell stories. So, yeah, but yes, we all are just big fans of, obviously, of filmmaking, and
Yeah,
um,
yeah, it's incredible.
that's the core.
Talking about the creator, James, like we said that you were, we talked about how it was your first main production designer job of a film that came out. And working with Gareth was the first time, despite all the similar interests that you guys had in the, in films that you've watched or you've grown up with, or the visuals and the vision. Do you remember a moment when things weren't a challenge essentially, where things weren't going as you had hoped, in terms of whether it was designing something or working on a particular scene? If you have a story to share about that, it's not necessarily anything controversial. I just love listening to things,
Sure.
problems, and then trying to find a solution to it, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, there are many cases where, you know, it's that kind of blank page syndrome of like, oh my God, we've got this whole scene to work out. How do we do it? And one of the more complicated ones was towards the end of the film where Joshua and Alfie are trying to escape in this escape pod, and there's
Mm,
multiple kind of chambers. There's the escape pod, there's this main chamber, there's like an airlock where Joshua has to get air back, or oxygen. There's some tentacle creature that comes down. Now, in an earlier edit, that was a much more expanded scene, but you can still see the amount of complexity that came into, okay, how do they come into this room? How do they get to the end of the room, and are able to, Alfie has to go turn on the oxygen again. She has to start up the escape pod and all the systems of starting it up. There's a door that has to come down.
mm-hmm.
All of that stuff was in the script, but it wasn't so detailed that I can just start designing the space. It had to require Gareth and I getting on Zoom call after Zoom call of like, okay, well, is this thing here? Maybe this whole thing rotates and new escape pods kind of rotate down into place so you can load in and drop another one in. How does that play into the sequence? How does that play into the emotional context of it all? And there was a lot of just me kind of sketching in front of Gareth on a Zoom call, like copy pasting industrial spaces with really crude sketches of what this could look like. We knew Gareth knows that because of his VFX background and just filmmaking background, he knows that he doesn't need everything completely fleshed out initially. It could
Yeah.
look like I did so many really bad, rough sketches that if he found what he needed in it, if it worked shot wise or it worked visually for him, he wouldn't sweat then having to get into the details. We'd kind of put it aside and then move on to something else. But that whole airlock sequence
Yep.
was a real brain twister. And the other one was the Nomad itself, that big kind of flying bird of prey, U.S. military bird of death kind of thing.
Yep.
Um, we didn't really, it was just kind of described as a bit of a space station that could kind of float above Earth and kind of, target different locations. The actual look of it, we just didn't have any idea. It was just, again, we had the benefit of the pandemic. Our production was actually supposed to start to shoot in the spring of 2020 when the pandemic really kicked
Yep.
off. So unfortunately, we couldn't shoot then, but there was money for Gareth and I to jump on Zoom calls once in a while and spend a few hours together and try to kind of work some stuff out. And one of the big ones was that Nomad, and trying to understand not only what it looked like, but how it functioned, where the targeting systems came down, where the missiles were loaded, all that stuff. But we went through hundreds and hundreds of sketches and ideas of what that thing could look like before we arrived at what you saw in the film. Um, yeah, and then that collaboration is what helped keep a little bit of the production down, the budget down. We worked very kind of smaller teams than typical. We had a little bit more time to kind of work together one on one rather than huge teams of people
Right.
trying to push it forward. It was important to Gareth to work kind of hands on and as intimate as possible with all the filmmakers. It allows him more freedom, and it allows him to not have to think about the logistics of everything. It lets him be creative. So
Yeah.
um, it's one of the big things we tried to keep going was the kind of one-on-one contact, not only with myself, but with all the filmmakers.
Yeah. And I think that's important, at least even for me, like, I'm not really on massive sets, but that level of intimacy, whereas that, people know each other. On a film like, for example, War of the Worlds or Star Trek, the ones that you worked on, obviously you have a crew of sometimes 150, 200 plus people, and you don't get to meet or connect with pretty much all of them, but that's just the
Right.
nature of business. But in
Yep.
that level, and of course, it depends on the production budget and what the vision is. But there is this, I feel, and I think again, I said it earlier, it shows in the film, almost pretty much every film that Gareth has done, but especially this one and Monsters, where there is that feel that it was a very intimate production, whether it was because of COVID or whatever the reason was. And it makes it more human. It makes it much
Mm-hmm.
more human.
Well, he's I don't know if he'll say it, but he's an emotional guy. He's got a he puts up a front sometimes. Maybe it's his English kind of what manner of of just communication, but he is like a real he can be a really emotional and like really caring and uh individual who really wants to kind of get at the core of what it means to to write stories about fictional characters. It's really it's something. It's not only the characters; it's obviously the design and how he makes a movie. It's very personal for him.
Yeah.
I'm sure if he had it his way, and maybe someday the technology will be there where he'll just be able to make the most personal Gareth Edwards movie because he won't need hundreds of people. I
Yeah.
mean, that would be a sad thing because I love working with filmmakers, but there might be a point where you just have a library of assets in Unreal Engine, and it's just you just drag and drop stuff, and you drag and drop location shoots and all that stuff, and you can build your own movie.
Yep.
But until that day, he likes to work with crew that are on his level.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. No, I truly enjoyed your work in it, and just that sense of when saw the trailer the first time, without watching the film, of course, the first things that came to my mind, besides being a Gareth Edward film and it looks cool, these were the three titles that came to my mind: Apocalypse Now,
Mm-hmm.
AI artificial intelligence. And I don't know how, and I thought about it after. It was more about the visuals of the droids, the way they were designed. You probably remember Short Circuit from the 80s.
Oh, sure.
Number
Yeah, of course.
Johnny number five. And especially the first two titles, like it just felt like a crisscross from a standpoint of visuals, and it wasn't in any way uh about AI and then the Vietnam War and then what the insurgency sort of that took
Yep.
place in post 9/11. And Yeah, there's a lot of his childhood movies that he grew up with, you grew up with, I grew up with in that film. And especially with AI, artificial intelligence, which you worked on, where it's where the whole concept of film was discrimination against robots, right? And
Hmm.
that's pretty much what this tackles too, but in a completely different way. Um, it, I'm just kind of going on with my comments, but my next question is more about if you are able to discuss what is in future for you or right now for you, what are you working on?
I would love to talk about it, but I
But there's
can't.
always a but. Yeah.
You know,
I
NDAs, all
know.
that stuff.
I know.
But
I know. I get it.
yeah, I would
Something
love to
ex
talk about it.
something exciting that people should look forward to.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're so early days. We're just wrapping our heads around it, but working with some wonderful filmmakers. And yeah, it's it's
Got
can't
it.
say really can't say
That's
much,
okay.
but
So
other than that,
you have worked with J.J. Abrams.
we'll talk in a couple of years. And I'll tell you all about
Absolutely. You work with J.J. Abrams, you work with Spielberg, you worked with Gareth, you work with some great directors. You have the filmography that you have, not just great directors, but very good films, great films, memorable films. Who is one director that you would love to work with or you've been itching to work with for a while?
it. Ooh, it's a good one. Um, oof. I mean,
I mean, you work
there's
with
so
James
many.
Cameron too,
I worked with
not to say,
Jim on a couple things.
yeah,
I mean, Ridley Scott, I have tremendous respect for. Um, I love I love the films of Quentin Tarantino,
yes,
um, Martin Scorsese. Like I love all those kind of movies. Even like Paul Thomas Anderson and yeah. I mean, there's so many people that I'd love to work with. I think it's important that I'm the right fit for those projects.
of course,
Um, Christopher Nolan, but it's really the people that are building the movie, primarily the director, but also the producers and
mm-hmm,
DPs and everybody that's surrounding the whole core team. Um, is most important to me. And then, obviously the kind of subject matter and whether I like the script, or not that I like the script, that I connect with the script on some level, or I have some kind of vision of what it could be. But um, yeah, probably those people. I mean, there's just so many wonderful
yeah.
people out there. It's a long list. We'll just leave it at that.
No, that's fair enough. And the thing that I just sort of want to close up with, oh geez, I just lost my train of thought. What was I going to ask you? It was follow up to the question that I was just asking you. Yeah, I'm just gone blank. In any case, um, what? Oh, let me think of another one here. I had another question in my mind. I never prepare this stuff. I just kind of go on a wing based on a movie that
That's
I've
great.
seen or book I've read. So
You're going on
sometimes,
instinct and yeah,
yeah.
emotion.
Um,
Um,
what? Oh yes, I remember now. An experience on working on a film doesn't matter if it was a box office hit or a failure or whatever it was that you enjoyed the most, just like a child would.
Me personally working on a film.
Hmm.
Um, hmm. I mean, I would say I had a lot of fun, but it was also one of the more difficult productions. Was Force Awakens, because it was kind of
Mm,
this whole circle of growing up as a small child and seeing all those movies and never even dreaming of working on one of them. Like everybody says, "Oh, I wish I can dream. I dream of doing that." I didn't.
mm,
There's no dream there. There was just a sheer fanaticism for those movies. Um, so to be able to kind of work on a Star Wars film that took place 30 years after Return of the Jedi, and I remember sitting in a screening room with all the ILM people. We're getting the first cut sequence back from JJ for the film, and it's a small little viewing station,
Yep.
probably 20 people in there. And I was just looking at everybody, and I didn't say anything, but I was just looking around, going, "We are watching, the first clips of a Star Wars movie that's part of that original storyline that we were all kids, all growing up on." Like I was in this kind of very surreal state at that point. Like, I
Yeah.
can't believe not only am I in the room looking at this, nobody else is getting to see. I'm actually a small part of it. Um, so that was a real trip to kind of be a part of it. And that film was very difficult because we were trying to kind of define what a Star Wars movie was 30 years after Return of the Jedi. But it was also just so much fun to kind of be involved in it on every level.
What a great arc to your own story that is continuing on, and I hope continues on for a long time. Whenever you have time and if you're up for it, I would love to chat about your other work from the past, and hopefully in the future as well.
Yeah, of course. Reach out anytime. It's a pleasure to kind of, again, all we're doing is just like-minded people wanting to talk about films. Like there's just nothing better. So yeah, reach out anytime.
Will do. Thank you so much, James, for your time, and wish you all the best in the next upcoming projects.
All right. Thank you, Joe. I'll
Take care.
talk to you soon. Bye.
Take care. Yes, absolutely. Bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment, and do come back for another episode. Until then, have a great day.